Alright, back at her. What am I doing? Actually, I was just getting ready to check this out. This is I don't know if any of you are familiar with what's considered the record book. There's a book, a global renowned book called the Boone and Crockett Wildlife Records Book. And to get a minimum species entered, it's got to be a certain amount of inches in length and girth and all this other stuff and measurements. But anyway, this is a grizzly skull from a monster. It's a Boone and Crockett class grizzly bear. I know what, I forget, it's 24 and 7/8 inches or something. It's a big mountain inland grizzly bear. And if any of you are curious, you might be able to see it or not, but his teeth, his skull was starting to rot from old age. And my veterinarian friend said that was going to be the beginning of his demise. That was a signal of his end was coming. So I harvested him at the right time. And he's got a little bit of red on it because we used it. The four of us, the kids and Sarah and I, we had our own little private pumpkin carving contest, and I used this as a prop for mine, and I put some fake blood color on it, so I got to wash that off. I had that chomp into the head of my pumpkin. Anyways, of course, what did I do? Dropped it and broke it. So I got some Gorilla Glue. I'm going to glue it back together. And then eventually I'll put a little bit of display in here somewhere with some shelving, because I have a skull from basically, I think I've got a skull from every predator known in BC. Just one or two of each. Huge wolf, wolverine. What else do I got? Bobcat, lynx, fox, coyote, and black bear and grizzly bear. Kind of interesting to see them all in a line and observing them. But anyways, that one. What day is it today? I don't know. What are we? Sunday night. Sunday night. I was going to go down to the river, but it's getting a little bit later out. Probably don't have enough time. I'm going to run out of some light. It's been warm enough. It's pretty tough to get down there and have the place to myself. I think first thing in the morning, 5 in the morning might be interesting if I go down there then. What else? What did I do? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to either, how should I do this? If I should just start another channel specifically for the live feed, or if I should do its own channel, because I'm starting to get geared up, but I've had a little bit of a drawback today. We went into town with shopping. What I'm getting at is, and my plan to have the battery pack that I have, take the Starlink setup, and what I want to do is obviously live stream and keep in touch with the world while I'm remote. Would be very cool. But I'm trying to figure out the right recipe to have a camera which will stream live via the Starlink, and believe it's very hard to figure out. It's been very hard to figure out. The webcams, well, obviously they kind of suck in a way because everything's so far away, right? And then rarely do they have audio. So now I'm looking at, I got to try to figure out how I can get a webcam and a microphone and the Starlink and a laptop and the battery pack, and then have to hide in a log jam or something at the first place we're going to attempt this, in a remote place for rutting monstrous Roosevelt elk bulls, wolves chasing them, potential cougars, bears, whatever else is there, right? And I'll set that up and leave it and let it live stream on its own channel 24/7. And then you guys, anybody can go check it out whenever you want, and I believe you can go back in time on the YouTube channel itself to see what you missed during the evening or during the day, right? And I have to have audio. Have to, for obvious reasons, right? Who knows what sounds are going to be in the night, let alone the day. So I did find a camera today. Well, I went to a place called Best Buy, and they didn't have a clue. Hold on a minute, it's going to be on my history here. Finding this camera. Sorry, give me 1 second. I think this is it here. I found a couple channels. You know, there's one. It streams live nonstop over an eagle nest. There's another one in Alaska. It streams live nonstop in the river where the brown bears getting the salmon, but it doesn't say what camera it is. This one does. So, apparently, where is it? Come on, where is it? It's the camera this one channel uses is the Axis, AXIS P1448LE camera. Oh, with a microphone. Oh, I thought it had its own microphone. Anyway, so this camera, alright, if it has a microphone, I'll get the microphone. This camera does night vision and daytime and streams up from the outdoors, and it will stream to YouTube. That's what I'm getting at. The cameras that I was finding, all your home security cameras that I found, they won't stream through to YouTube. Why? I don't have a freaking clue. It's so stupid. And then, of course, the only other way is to get your video cameras and hook it up, but I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to get this as light and compact as possible because this has got to get backpacked down the mountain, across the valley, and then along the river. And I have yet to decide if I'm going to use a pole to put the Starlink dish on top of yet or not. A whole pile of you emailed me with information on how to paint the dish. Thank you so much for that. Note taken. Got that knowledge now. So I will be painting the dish to let it blend in very well. And then I will be hiding. I'll probably pack some kind of a box down there to hide the power pack in. And then I'll have to go get the solar panels. I forgot to get those today. The solar charging panels for the power pack. Those will have to be in the open. Maybe I could put those above the Starlink dish. And then wire it. It has to be hardwired to this camera. So that means I have to use a laptop. But that's fine. I got a cheap, shitty laptop here I can use. It just has to stream the Wi-Fi, right? Or not the Wi-Fi. It'll stream Wi-Fi will hook up with the Starlink setup, and then I'll be able to log on to YouTube on the spot. The camera will hardwire into the laptop, and I already have 250 feet of that cable I can use, so I can make the camera get far away from that setup, and then leave it in that. We already have this one particular area picked out to leave it and let it stream live 24/7. I think that'd be so freaking cool. So, and it's something, when you do something like that, you need to do it right. This camera's going to cost a couple grand by the looks of it. So we'll see. Maybe the channel could get monetized and it'll pay for itself, right? And then I will as well be taking that whole setup with me up north, but I won't. I don't know. I've got a few ideas for that setup when I go up on my first northern trip. It could be because I don't want to leave it anywhere, but it could be because I'm going to be using that to stream out of camp. But what I might do, I do know of 2 different places where I can bring that whole setup with me. The Starlink, the laptop, pre-set it up, put it in place, because I have this one spot where I can wait on this little perch, and the elk, whatever, grizzly bears, something is going to come out of this trail right in front of me if I sit there long enough. They usually do. And I'll get it on, and I'll stream it live on the channel, so it kind of be like going on a hunting trip. Live feed with me as I hunt. That'd be freaking crazy too, right? Especially if shit went down. You can sit there with me, dead silent, on the hunt, live. Very cool. So that's the camera. That's the camera. So far, it's the only one. So I guess what I'm saying is, if anybody out there has a better idea than this camera, again, the one I found, well, that's pretty crystal clear night vision too, though. It's going to be hard to beat this camera, I think. But it is the Axis, AXIS P1448-LE camera with an ETS ML1 WPW microphone. That's what I'm leaning towards right now, unless some of my tech geek friends out there can come up with an easier system. Alright? But I think that's probably the best way. And I've been digging like a dog. I'm trying to get this done so I can make it happen on this next trip, which is in less than 2 weeks. I'm out of here. There you go. There's my babble. There is my babble. Not quite of a impactful babble as yesterday. but I will make note, don't forget. Don't forget. So you see somebody taking away your speech, it's an act of war. Share that with anybody and everybody you know, that the act of taking away someone's speech, that is an absolute act of war against humanity. It doesn't matter who it is. All right? And make sure you tell your friends and share with your friends and family that. Share it with them. They don't have to agree, but I suggest you start getting the word out to all the people that our speech being suppressed intentionally is an act of war. Period. Now, listen to this. Hey Steve, my name is James Hancock, but my friends call me Jim. I live down here in southern Oklahoma, and I'm 53 years old. Never married, no kids, no family left living. Feel free to share everything if you decide to read this on your channel sometime. I really appreciate you providing a safe place for folks to talk about our experiences and the effect it has had on our lives without dealing with ignorant and insecure people attacking us. First found your channel just about when you uploaded your first Sasquatch video. As I was looking for knowledge about these beings on YouTube, I've always had a curious nature, and I read a lot. I respect and appreciate every person who has come forward to share their story. I hate the channels of the so-called researchers and wannabe paranormal radio show hosts, as I prefer to be able to just listen to people's experiences in their own words without some dude that calls himself a Sasquatch expert interrupting them. Which is why I like the way you just provide a voice for people without judgment and with empathy, as so many of us have been in such similar situations and can respect what each of us has been through and the way it has affected our lives. That's why, in one of your first videos on this subject, when you described the aftermath of encountering one of these beings as a life sentence, that I remember sitting in my living room saying to myself, that's it. That's exactly what it feels like. Because I realized I was trying to find a way to get past my experiences and put it behind me. At first, by trying to understand them, but I know now that it is truly a life sentence, and that I will always have to accept that every time I go into the woods, one may be watching me, and may or may not decide to let me know they're there. And there is no going back to when I thought between me and my shotgun, I was the top predator. I've come to think of them the way I recall First Nations peoples, indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, describe them as the boss of the woods or the boss of the mountain. And that, I'm just going to have to live with it. Thanks for that. It has helped me be realistic in my goals and move forward and get on with my life. I still love the woods and I still get out there. I just am sorry, that's me. I am just hyper vigilant now. And I have a bigger shotgun, LOL. I'd always believed the Sasquatch were real since I was a kid. I remember watching a movie in the 70s about a Sasquatch expedition in British Columbia, and I saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek around the same time. But as I became an adult, even knowing that Folk, Arkansas, where the events that inspired that movie took place, was just 200 or 300 miles downriver from where I now live, and have since 1973. I still thought a Sasquatch as something that only existed up in the Pacific Northwest and Canada. I guess I had forgotten the stories that my parents and neighbors used to talk about, of Sasquatch being seen down on the lake, and of a big hairy giant trying to break into a couple's garage one night across town, and then running back towards the railroad tracks at the edge of town. I remember thinking about some of these stories about 11 p.m. one hot summer night when I was 11 years old. Now this next part is weird, but I'm just going to tell it like it happened. It is what it is, and I still recall it vividly. As I was thinking about these stories, I just had the idea pop into my head that the Bigfoot could roam around the houses on my street at night, and that if I went over to my bedroom window and looked outside, I might see one. I pause here to mention I lived in a small town, and the street I live on is only a block from the woods at the edge of town. And those woods go all the way to the lake. So I crawled up on my bed, pulled back the curtain on my window, and what I saw was the neighbor's cedar tree, trimmed up to overhead height where my neighbor parked his pickup in his driveway. and a street light just beyond, backlighting it. And leaning over into the bed of the truck, probably looking at me, was a very big man wearing what looked like a fur coat. But when he raised his arm up, I could see long stringy hair backlighted by the street light that I guess had to be 8 or 10 inches long. I just stared at it for a while, and it never moved from where it was leaning over the pickup bed. I was never scared, just confused. I went to my neighbor's house the next morning and asked Percy if anyone went out to his truck after dark last night, and he said nobody went outside all night. I also noticed the bed of his truck was empty, so I asked if anything had been in the bed of the truck last night, and he said no. I was trying to figure out what it was doing leaning over the bed of the pickup, what it might have been looking for. And my gut now tells me what it was looking for was looking out my window. My mother is Irish and Native American, and with no dad around, she taught me to hunt and find wild edible plants. She also taught me that psychic abilities, or what you would call a sixth sense, were normal and just a part of life. She was much more sensitive than I was, or maybe more or may ever be. She first noticed something was paralleling us through the trees down at the lake one time, and said she felt watched in those woods. I did too after I ignored my gut and started hunting there. Especially on the days when there was no game. I kept checking my back trail as I felt like I was being followed. One time, wanting to get out of the trees and stopping out in the middle of a dry creek bed about 20 yards wide, I stopped there and just stood still, listening for anything that might be following me. After about 10 minutes, I started walking again, and when I took my first step, something big on each side of the creek, in the brush closest to where I was standing, took off, tearing through the brush. Another time, as a friend and I were traversing the clearing with about a foot-high grass in it, something big took off towards the wood line about 30 or 40 yards. I could see the grass moving going towards the woods, and there was hardly any brush at the wood line. And I was looking to see what was moving to the grass, but when it reached the wood line, nothing came out of the grass and the noise stopped. I turned to look at my friend, had an alarmed look on his face. Can I ask him, did he see what that was? And he said vehemently, no, he did not. He didn't want to talk about it. I also noticed, especially when I went deep into one part of that area, something being thrown, but not thrown at me. But I could hear something that sounded like a rock striking leaves as it arced through the trees at a 90-degree angle in front of me. This happened regularly, and for some reason I never gave it much thought. Until, that is, I got the shiny idea to camp there one night, and something was thrown to the edge of my camp from about 30 feet away. I thought about that all night long while hanging on to my .45 long Colt revolver. As I was growing up, my mother used to tell me stories of things that happened when I was very young, as well as things she was taught by her mother and father. She told me once how her father, who was Irish and Cherokee, and what folks around here called a water witch, as he could find water using peach tree limbs and tell you how far down you have to dig. About how he told her when she first started hunting squirrels and rabbits for food during the Depression, that there were things out in those woods that her gun would be no defense against, and to keep her feelings out and aware of what was around her at all times. My grandfather died when I was 4 years old, but months before, when I was 3, my father, mother, grandfather, half-brother, and myself went camping down on a lake in Texas. There were a few people there when we got there, but they all headed out before dark. My mother, half-brother, and I laid down in the tent while my father and my mother's father laid down on some concrete picnic tables. Right after full dark, my grandfather ordered my ex-Marine father to get us up out of the tent, to throw everything into the car, and then we were leaving right now. In such a tone that my father, who could be an argumentative type, didn't question, and did as he was told. All my grandfather would say is that we were surrounded, and he didn't think they were human. I'm telling this the way I am partially because I've heard some people describe the experience with these beings as almost like being haunted. that not only will they follow you home, as Scott Carpenter has described, but of running into these beings in places hundreds of miles apart, like they know that you are aware of their kind. I long ago decided these beings somehow knew not only our intentions, but what we were thinking. I also believe that this is how they make people terrified and filled with dread. On the flip side, I've also come to believe, but they can make you feel calm and at peace if they want to. Agreed. Speaking of which, something happened the bow season of 1996 down at the woods I'd been hunting down on the lake. I drove down there with my bow, parked in my normal spot. I could not get out of the truck. Extreme fear and dread overwhelmed me. I felt like if I got out of my truck, something was watching, something very dangerous. When I first considered hunting this spot years ago, I mentioned my intentions to my mother, and she warned me not to. She said she had a vision of something black with teeth that would kill me if I went down there. I knew to respect my mother's vision and said okay, and looked for other places to hunt. Years later, I told her I was thinking again about hunting down in those woods again, and asked her how she felt about it. And she said it didn't seem to be down there anymore, and to go ahead and hunt there. And I did. As I described, until that day, I first took my bow to the woods in '96. I did get out of the truck eventually. I'd gotten away from much of the things, ideas, and beliefs my mother had taught me, and should have known better. Yeah, always. Excuse me. I made it about 30 yards down the trail, wondering if I was having some kind of mental breakdown, and realized this wasn't going away. And I couldn't hunt with the weight of this terror weighing on me. So I went back to my truck and drove to another hunting spot a couple miles away. But I was so rattled. Still, I ended up going home and skipping the season. About 3 or 4 months later, I was sighting in a .22 rifle in a clearing with a mud bank that all of us locals used as a shooting range. And this is about a mile from where I had parked my truck that first day of bow season. The clearing was just off a dirt road that went down the hill to the boat ramp. I could hear some people down at the ramp as I was sighting in, and after a while they drove by and left. Then the fear came back. I don't know why, but I didn't connect it to my experience months earlier and was pissed because I'd figured some asshole was looking at me through a rifle scope. Maybe someone that came with the group that left. I made myself walk to pick up my target. I hate it when people trash up a shooting range. And walk, not run back to the car and left. I must have been really dumb back then, because a day or two later I decided to sight in a scope I had mounted on my SKS. I asked my mom if she felt like going down to the lake, so she and her dog and I headed down there. I went about my business sighting in and stopped when I was down to 3 rounds. My mom and the dog had walked down the hill to the boat ramp and were just returning as I was finishing up. I wanted to check a spot on the hill for the next deer season, across the deep ravine that ran past the edge of the clearing. So I asked my mom if she felt like walking a bit up into the woods, and she said she did. And by the time we were up the hill across from the ravine from the clearing, it was getting late in the day with the sun starting to set. My mother informed me that she needed to answer the call of nature, so I sat down against a tree facing away to give her some privacy as she went downhill a bit into the ravine. As I was sitting there enjoying the crisp air, I heard this high-pitched call that sounded somewhat like a whistle right in front of me. I couldn't guess at that distance, and then I heard it again, but louder and closer on my left. As I'm trying to figure out what could have made those strange calls, my mother came up behind me and said someone was standing by the car. I got up and walked to where I could see the car through the trees on the other side of the ravine. I couldn't see anything. There was a cedar to the right of the car growing at the edge of the ravine, and while I doubted my mother would mistake a tree for a person, I asked her if they were still there, and she said no. They were gone. It was getting late, so I asked her if she was ready to head back, and she said she was, and sounded nervous. And I thought that odd. Few typos, no biggie. So by the time we were back on the road walking up the hill to the clearing and the car, we ran into a wall of smell, like a cross between a pig pen and an open pit toilet in the middle of summer. The dog started going nuts, and my mother had her hands full keeping her from running off. I didn't offer to help because I became aware that something was in the brush next to my mother's side of the car, and I thought again about what my mom said she saw. I also knew this wasn't something normal, waiting on us in the brush, so I stopped walking. It was dark enough that I could not see under the brush anymore, and we had our backs to the lake, and I knew going near the car with that thing in the brush so close was not an option. Unable to think of anything else, I tried to scare whatever it was. I tried to scare off whatever that was by firing a shot into the air, leaving me with 2 bullets. I waited for a bit but didn't hear it move, and still knew it was there. So I fired a second round and waited, and it still didn't move. I was thinking about my last bullet and considering my options, including putting it in the brush, when I heard it take off. It sounded like a man running, but every step sounded like a 10 rock being slammed into the ground. I probably meant a 10-ton rock being slammed into the ground. I heard 3 steps, a pause, and then a loud thump where it had jumped from the clearing to a shelf about 6 feet below the rim of the gully. I know it was there because as we were getting into the car, I listened to it yammering at me in what sounded like frustration, and I could tell that the lungs powering that voice were huge. It sounded very big. We got home, my mom told me in detail what she saw. A very large, hairy man with a peaked skull and reddish-brown hair backlighted by the setting sun. I knew there was only one thing this could be, so I got a tape measure, and while my mom stood in the porch using the car that was standing by for scale, I had her tell me when the top of the tape reached where the top of its head was, which measured 7.5 feet. My mother was haunted by nightmares of them for the rest of her life. Several months later, using my state-of-the-art, at the time, web TV to search the internet, I came across the website that is an acronym that I think means Big Effing Retarded Organization. Okay, sorry. Or at least that's the way I think of it. Ran by he who shall not be named, long story shorter. Then I got my first taste of being around professional Bigfoot researchers. It left a foul taste in my mouth, to say the least. Years later, still trying to learn from other people's experiences, I heard in a chat room that the same group that I met labeled the area as being too dangerous to research after they went down there one night and called blasted and got roared at and ran out. The only good to come out of that is when I played tour guide for those yo-yos, I came across something in a creek bed, some disturbed gravel with a large heel print on one side of the gravel bar and the other side a clay bank, 5 perfect toes, at least twice the width of my foot. You're a hunter and tracker. Oh, so I have no doubt you understand what I'm about to say regarding tracking. I spent my youth looking at tracks and visualizing the animal that made it. I looked at those toe prints, the top of the bank, and could visualize him standing there with his toes dug into the bank, resting his arms at the top of the bank and watching the top of the gully where I would walk when entering the woods in that part of the area. That chilled me for some reason, and somehow made everything that had happened came together in my mind. In the feeling, but not only being hunted, but the in-your-face understanding the size and nature of what was hunting me hit me like a ton of bricks. That's when I started searching for the truth about these beings. I've seen one since then on all fours after a hellish morning trying to squirrel hunt. Had a tree knock about 100 yards away in another part of the state right after my mother passed away. I've had my house slapped a time or two late at night. Seen orbs. I've also noticed more than just one year in the dead of winter, one bitter cold windless nights, I could hear the call of several great horned owls calling to one another around my house, here in my neighborhood. I did some research, confirmed the call I heard was that of a great horned owl, but was unaware of, nor could I confirm, that they would come into town in groups. If you're familiar with this behavior occurring, I'd appreciate a heads up, especially when a year or two ago I was in my living room on such a night, and the thought popped in my head that I hadn't heard the owls quite some time. Again, mulling that over, I would be surprised if this does not apply to them as it does to us. And I also recognize that the Sasquatch are not the only thing that live in our woods. I think people should know that there's more out there than what the government or the media will tell them, so that they can so that they can make informed, intelligent decisions on where they go and what it is possible that they may encounter, as well as people being able to understand when they are being stalked, even around their own home, even in town. The government won't acknowledge anything that they cannot control, and most of the research in this country is publicly funded by the government, making it very much against the interests of scientists to speak up, whether it is about Sasquatch, UFOs, or aliens. So, it's as you've said on your channel, if we want to know, we're going to have to learn it from each other. Anyway, sorry this is too long. Feel free to leave out some of my ramblings to shorten it, if you ever decide to share it on your channel. Thanks again for what you're doing to help folks. Stay safe and good hunting, Jim. Jim, appreciate you, man. It was one of the longer ones, but you know what, Jim? The truth is, if I chopped out what I thought the people shouldn't hear wasn't important, then this would not be the place where everyone's heard word for word, right? So, I'll never do that. I do leave out the names of individuals who I know would love to be promoted when their names come up, and I intentionally leave those out. But I let everybody know why at the same time. But anyway, you're right. You're absolutely right. Well, I'm not the one to say you're right or wrong about anything, but I should say I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. The only way we learn accurate, true knowledge 2 days from each other. That's the only way. It's not going to happen in the public school system. It's not going to happen. And those dirtbags who have been manipulating us severely for our whole lives, they have nothing we need to learn from them. The only thing we need to learn about them is the truth about them, and that's it, right? So, we got to embrace each other and support the shit out of each other, and don't let anyone get in between us ever. Ever, alright? If somehow, some way, if we could get out to everybody in the world, take from what you will and leave it, but here it is, right? And let's still be friends and neighbors and talk out loud, and I want to hear what you think. It's too easy. When you govern yourself that way, how can there even be room for any kind of anger or hate? Do you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous how we can be divided instead of, oh, well, here you go, this is what I know, this is what I saw, take from what you will or leave it, but that's what happened. That's what happened, right? When you have a person in the community sharing honestly, that's what happened. When it comes to this topic, and how many other topics in the world today can you think of applying that to? I managed to get that stuck in my body, and that's what happened. Take from what you will or leave it. But at least I'm sharing the honest truth, right? You can do that with every single topic that we have. Anyways, I'm getting caught up in the babbling. I appreciate you sending that in, man. I hope you're still with us watching the channel, Jim. And if you learned anything else firsthand, or somebody else you know, and you've got knowledge that's going to help the people here, then send it away, man. Get it out there in the public, either through somebody or me, and I'll make sure it gets to the people, alright? Next. Alright, who's next? This is titled, These Are Not Apes. Agreed. Alright, let me straighten out my shit here. Hello, Steve. I must say what an absolute effing badass you are. Just for putting yourself out there. We all know the so-called authorities will ruin your life just for saying they are real. I've been told by the area sheriff that if I don't shut my effing mouth about the hairy people, then we won't get the funding we need to develop the woodland of Calhoun County. C-A-L-H-O-U-N County. I've been threatened by law enforcement and political leaders in our area. We own a small plot of land at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We've got over 60 acres. It's been in my family for generations. I told you about my great uncle getting torn from asshole to elbow by the hairy man family. I remember that story, so that's you. It happened a long time ago, but the story is told in my family every year. Now I have a story to tell you about my brother and his friend that happened just 3 years ago. My brother didn't believe me about not crossing into the hairy people's valley. He's an ex-military, self-proclaimed badass. They decided to hunt and camp right on the line where we don't cross. We don't, and they don't. Anyway, They camped too close to these monsters. Well, they found out the hard way that these MFers mean business. They woke up at 3 in the morning hearing their 2 large pit bull dogs being ripped to pieces. They came home crying and bitching for all of us to go with them and wipe out the whole family of these hairy beings. And I explained to him that we've seen at least 30 of these bastards going into the caves they live in. That sounds interesting. I know if we start a war with these people, we will lose. They can hide in these miles of caves. Then come out and kill whoever they want when they want, and will receive no help from the government or the cops. It's just an unwritten law for some reason. I don't know why, but I know it's true. Please share my story with Steve. People need to know that they are not only fighting these monsters, but for some reason we are fighting the very people that are supposed to keep us safe. I'm sure I'll be catching hell from our local law enforcement, but I'm beyond of giving a damn. Use my name and my brother's name. I'm Michael Rogers, and my brother's name is Tony Rogers. F them and the BS they have put on us. I'm ready to speak up and start talking about these dangerous, hairy people. Thanks, Steve. Never give up. You're the badass we needed to start this, talking about this out in the open. I think I may have read this before, but let's just keep her going. And here's another email from him. And this is back in 2020. So, okay, so this next email came before the one I just read. Of course, right? Hello, Steve. I'll try to keep this story as short as I can. I grew up in Alabama on my family's 64 acres of land. It's been in our family for 3 generations. We are outdoorsmen that's always hunted our land for food on the table. It's how we live. My grandfather always told us to stay out of the hollow past the rock quarry. Don't hunt there or you will die. The hairy man won't come out of there unless you F up and go there. My grandpa never BS'd anyone at any time. I'm 59 and I spend most days in the woods. It's part of me. I've seen these beings through my scope and even up close one evening. I was on top of the mountain one evening before it started to get dark. I saw the hairy man walking into their cave with a large buck on his shoulder. 2 grown men would have had trouble carrying this huge Bama buck. This giant had no problem with it at all. The daddy of this family is over 7 feet tall and weighs over 400 pounds. It seems like a shit story, but on my kid's life it's true. My daddy told me not to go there, and I've told my sons not to go there. It's the only way for us to stay alive on our land. They've got about 10 acres, and we got the rest. My grandpa told me that they were there long before he was born. These effers are not apes. They are people that have been in hiding for hundreds of years. Only one of us have gone in there, and it was my grandpa's brother, and he was ripped to pieces and left in a tree for them to find. My grandma told me about it when I was a kid. It's not just a bullshit story to scare the kids. It's a true story that we take very serious. I've got grandkids that watch your channel. They ask you, don't use my full name. And they ask you don't use my full name. Their friends wouldn't believe it, and kids are so cruel to each other. So, thank you for listening to my story, my friend. I will send you another one soon that happened to my 2 brothers. Keep up the good work and tell our stories. More people need to know what is going on. Thanks again, Michael Rogers. All right, so then he changed his mind in the second email and said, use my name. Okay, I read those. That's a long time ago. That's a few years ago. I read them before. It sounds familiar. Maybe not the second one, but the first one for sure. That's pretty alarming, isn't it? But I will share with you guys that recently I had somebody who I respect immensely and has a pile of knowledge in these beings said to me, quote, this group may have gone underground again, I'm not sure yet, end quote. Right? Just when you start to think you might know a bunch of stuff, you get the odd sentence thrown in there to throw your brain in a circle from somebody who you respect immensely and who has a pile of knowledge. So, but I will be finding out more on that in the very near future, without a doubt, and I'll be sharing that information with you guys too, though, right? Take from what you will, leave it. Sounds like a pretty legit story to me. And I've got his information here, as usual, too, right? Steve. There's no title on this. I just recently discovered your channel, and I've been enjoying reading the stories that people have submitted to you. Before I start, I'd like to mention my theories about what Sasquatches are, and why most people had a reaction of horror to them, and a traumatic fear that changed the rest of their lives. Number one, we hear about the Native American war with the giants, and I suspect the red-haired giants were Sasquatches and that they, can't tell where all the hair was on the bodies because they recover bones all over the world, actually, with just a few strands of hair attached. Number two, the Book of Enoch, recently available mainstream, talks about the Watcher angels breeding with daughters/granddaughters of Cain cursed angels with cursed human lineage. Likely would create evil offspring, right? Our finest warriors, with highly trained perception that tells them they are in the presence of evil and danger, come away terrified. It means that there is something horrific there. Anyway, just an idle thought. Secondly, I am mentioning the name of a friend's business that I haven't asked permission to do so. Maybe there's a way to mask that. I don't care if you use my first name, but using my last name might impact my clearance renewal. Although, I swear it's all true. I appreciate the respect you show to people, and I'm certain that makes a difference. I appreciate it so much I've decided to tell you my stories. Although they won't terrify anyone or change their lives, people might realize that encounters can happen to anyone at any time and don't have to be a dramatic deal. In fact, although I can't say that I've seen Sasquatch, I can say that he definitely saw me. My first recollection of hearing about Sasquatch was in summer of the mid to late 70s when a friend of my father's, a county deputy that I'll call Jim, that lived about 45 miles away from my family in the mountains between two large towns, okay, large for Montana, Helena and Great Falls, Montana. Helena and Great Falls, Montana. I recall Jim explaining to my dad that he had just returned from a 5-state task force conference concerning the ongoing cattle mutilations. Each state that had the most mutilations sent a representative with that state's boxes of X-Files. Their collection of weird happenings were taken to analyze by the task force to see if there was any other phenomena happening in the same time period and area of the cattle deaths. Their end result was that the only other phenomena seen in all mutilation areas were Bigfoot sightings. In recent times, we know now that there are also often UFO sightings. But back then, there weren't so many. Jim went on to tell my dad that there was a hermit that lived near him up in the mountains. Mind you, the hermit had enough money to be considered eccentric, a retired businessman that had enough money to set himself up on a section of land in the woods with a huge log mansion in the middle of it, and heavy-grade 6-foot-high construction-grade chain-link fence around the entire property. He collected rescue dogs and had dozens of them. This sounds familiar too. Oh well, there's what, 100,000 new people here? There was a sign on the main gate to honk, and he would put the dogs up in a kennel by the house. He just wanted to retire in peace, so he kept to himself out there. Every couple of weeks, his daughter from Great Falls would call Jim to do a welfare check on her father, so he would drive over to the guy's place, stop in front of the gate, and honk. They would have a visit, and Jim would assure the daughter her father was fine and that, no, he didn't want to move back into town. Jim had just driven home in the wee hours of the morning from the X-Files conference. He carried in the boxes, took his boots, gun belt, and coat off, and was about to hit the shower when his phone rang. It was the hermit himself. He was hysterical and begging for help. Insisted Jim come right over and hung up. The call was shocking, and Jim's tiredness was replaced with adrenaline. Jim put on his boots, gun belt, and coat and jumped in the patrol blazer to race over to the, quote, compound, end quote. About 45 minutes later, he pulled up to the gate and honked. No dogs, not a sound from them, no snarling, barking, or growling. He gingerly opened the gate in case he had to run for it, and drove through the gate, stopping so close it behind him, stopping too close it behind him, calling out to the house, but no dogs. As he drove up beside the porch, still no dogs to be seen. He bellowed out to the hermit as he got out of his blazer, walked cautiously up and across the huge covered porch, and he finally heard a dog whimpering underneath. Looking up, he was surprised to see a window pane broken out and a shotgun pointing at him out the window. That shook him a little, and he said, "Hey, you called me, remember?" As soon as the man realized who he was, he unbarred the door and pulled Jim in, barring the door again behind him. He was still incoherent, obviously terrified. He made Jim sit at the window with the shotgun while he packed a bag, and finally calmed enough to tell Jim that about an hour before Jim got there, his dogs were barking furiously at the front door of the house. Thinking that bear had got through the fence, the hermit grabbed a double-barrel shotgun off the rack, loaded it with 2 slugs, opened the front door, and there was a bear all right, standing with its back to him, and the dogs snarling and leaping at it. The bear was standing upright, and its head brushed the 10-foot roof of the porch. The man told Jim that he gave it both slugs in the back, right where he thought the kidneys would be. The thing turned around and looked at him. It showed no panic, no fear, display of anger, or blood. It just stood there and looking at him. It was a Bigfoot. Most who scared the man was the lack of blood. Well, that, and he couldn't process that the thing wasn't a bear. It didn't make a noise or react in pain. It stood and looked at him as he stared up at it. Then it turned again and floated down the steps, at which point the dogs went under the porch. The hermit swore it seemed to float several inches off the ground. He insisted Jim take him to Great Falls to his daughter's house and never went back out there. He hired movers to go get his stuff and put the place up for sale. For several days, Jim went back with animal control to try to get the dogs for him, but they refused to come out from under the porch, even for food. He did a complete search of the area. No footprints, no blood, no obvious place where something came through the fence. On day 3, they lured the dogs out with raw meat and a noose and eventually caught them all. Jim told my dad that even if he thought the man was a liar, which he did not, the animals were so terrified he had to believe the events as told to him by the hermit. No man would go to the trouble to build his dream home and then suddenly flee from it to never return in less than an hour without something that terrified him. Years later, I moved to Columbia Falls, Montana, on the west side of Glacier Park. My friend and her then husband owned the House of Mystery, a fun tourist place on the east side of town. It is a 3-acre property with a natural vortex that sits on the river that comes out of Glacier Park. One evening I got a call that my friend was home alone after the place was closed for the day. She was really upset because every time she got settled down at the table in the dining room to do paperwork, the motion sensor lights would come on and she couldn't see anyone when she went out to check. It happened a few times and she had nobody to call to come over as her husband had gone on a 5-day rafting trip to Colorado. Naturally, I said I'd be right over. My daughter was gone for the weekend, so being the good friend that I am, I brought a couple of bottles of wine. Sure enough, we would sit down at the table, and the motion sensor lights came on within a minute or two. We took our glasses of wine and flashlights out to see who it was in our shorts and flip-flops. Being a tourist place on the hitchhiking route to Glacier Park, I figured it was just hitchhikers camping without permission down by the river. We were getting pretty snockered, drinking wine, laughing and talking, until we looked around for a bit and didn't find anything. We'd go back in, settle down, and then it would happen again and yet again. A couple times I heard something that sounded like a conversation between 2 samurais. Deep, guttural, but oddly sing-songy voices with a horrid smell I can only describe as wet dog, rotten egg, and my gym bag. Unpleasant enough to make me realize if those hitchhikers meant to murder us, and they hadn't yet, they weren't planning to. We went in for the night. Several times he/she, it tried to lure us out again, but we went to a different room and talked until we fell into a blissful wine-induced sleep. That fall, I took a temp job working for the park. I worked with a handsome native guy that grew up across the road from the Vortex. He used to sneak out from his grandmother's house to fish over at the river. He wasn't allowed over there because the natives called the place Bad Rock, and his grandparents had seen Bigfoot over there several times. One afternoon when Grandma thought he was napping, he crawled out the window, grabbed his pole, and made his escape. As he cut through the woods behind what later became the House of Mystery, he saw a bear at the riverbank. He stopped rapidly and made a noise. Only, oops, it wasn't a bear. It was a Bigfoot, and a big one. He said, as it stood up to at least 7 feet and turned to stare at him, he ran home and never went back. Wheels turned in my head, realizing that the bad smell and guttural language was Bigfoots? I asked my friend's husband about it. He said he knew they were there and had been trying to get trail camera pics and make a connection with them. I can also say that at least 2 different Bigfoots saw me. I'm quite sure they are probably still laughing about it, as I have heard I'm quite funny when I drink. Lastly, in 2010, I was working in Alaska. I was told Bigfoot stories by the natives that lived near me in Juneau. One fellow in particular wanted to insist that I shouldn't go out hiking alone. He said there are 2 kinds of Bigfoot in the area. One kind is the red/brown ones. They mind their own business, and you seldom know they are there unless you step too near their young, at which point the father will step out to distract you while the mother and young ones escape, like some wild birds do. He said the other kind are the white ones, and they are cannibals. They eat red/brown ones and people. If you see one, it is already too late for you. He said they like to watch and listen to women and children talking and laughing, and have carried them off in the past. They take a huge dislike to men and seem to treat them as a threat to their territory. Enough said to me. I taste like chicken, and I'm sure they know it. That is the sum total of my experiences, and I do feel better telling you. I hope that makes some folks feel better. It isn't your weakness that makes you feel weird and terrified. They have a supernatural ability to project hate and intimidation, and they hate men. Thanks, Jeannie. Jeannie, if you're here, I think you know I read this before, but I'm quite certain that was quite some time ago, and I had no problem reading that again. There are far, far, far too many new people here right now. I went back in my inbox the other day. Out of half an hour to do nothing, I went back in my inbox, I don't know, about 50 pages. Maybe, no. I think I went back a couple hundred pages. I don't know, whatever it was. And I just started reading emails because they're all marked as read. And I started reading them, hoping I wasn't going to recognize the ones I was reading, and then copy and save them into my notes again. And that's what I did yesterday. And sure enough, they're all first timers. But today I might have repeated one, maybe, or 2. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's all knowledge. It all needs to be heard. The House of Mystery. I think, didn't Dave Politis do a podcast there and go there and said this? It is a place to be seen? The House of Mysteries in Montana. I'm going to Google that up when I go in. But anyway, I'm starting to melt. It's late Sunday evening. And, we went shopping today. She's overwhelmed with all of the t-shirts and hats that she has. And she has them all in the boxes they came in. And each time she goes to do the orders, she's got to dig and dig and dig. And it's a big mess. So she wanted to make a display thing and cover a wall and make it her little shop area where she can get her stuff together to ship to you guys. So we bought a bunch of crates from one store, all of them they had left, and it wasn't enough. But I'll take a picture of that and put it up there. I'm proud of what she's done, and she takes great care in the looks and arrangement of her home and everything she does. So I don't think she wants me to share this picture yet, but I'm gonna anyway, because it's not complete. She wants to add to it. Maybe she'll do that tomorrow. We'll see. But anyway, she's got a lot of great shirts left. There's a few shirts for the ladies left there, just a few, I think. But I know she's ordered a whole pile more of the stuff for the ladies, so she's got that coming, you guys. I think it'll be pretty quick. I don't know. Anyway, here's the photo of her display, and the link for her items is in the description below. And I believe that Teespring thing is still underneath there, but it's going to be getting taken down. I think we found a better route, finally. So there you go. Share my story at howtohunt.com, and you will get your email heard word for word no matter what. All right? And keep the knowledge flowing. You never, ever, ever allow somebody or something to intentionally divide you from your friends or your family or coworkers ever again. When you sense that people are getting a wedge, try to be patient and kind and understanding and explain to people that that's what's going on. You've got to try to explain to them. Just take a couple breaths, sit back, take a look outside the bubble and see that you're getting angry at your fellow people in your community for nothing. All right? And ask them to figure out why that is. And help them. Help them get past that frustrating part. Anyways, I'm really tired and babbling. I'll see you guys tomorrow, no matter what.